A hiker's guide to plants of the desert Southwest, including cactus, wildflowers, native trees, interesting bushes, and the agave family. You'll learn where to find them, how to identify them, when flowers and fruit are available, and which ones are edible. Today we are talking cactus. In this series we will cover the majestic saguaro, the ubiquitous prickly pear, the iconic beryl, the infamous jumping cholla, the diminutive hedgehog, and the tiny pincushion varieties. Today's episode is the cholla.
Good morning. It's Kurt Papke coming to you from the Big Wash Trail in Oro Valley, Arizona, just outside of Tucson. We're going to spend some time talking about the cholla cactus. They are an important genus of cacti. You'll see them everywhere here in Arizona, up to an altitude or elevation of about 5,000 feet. So they have a pretty wide altitude range in which they grow. However, there's many different varieties of them, 25, 30 varieties or species of cholla cactus. So we're going to take a look at a couple of distinctive ones because they're really quite different, and depending upon where you go, you'll find a different prevalence of the different types of cactus. Here in the Big Wash in Oro Valley, it's kind of an unusual spot because we have a lot of cane cholla, Christmas cactus, and pencil cholla. And pencil cholla in particular is something you don't see around a lot on a lot of different trails here in the Tucson region in southern Arizona. So this is the Big Wash here is a great spot to find those kind of unusual sorts of cholla cactus, which is why I chose to film this segment of the video here, because they're so ubiquitous. The second reason is you have to be careful when you do encounter them. Because as you can see on my foot here, I've already got a cholla joint stuck in my shoe here, which is a pretty common occurrence. So you have to be careful when you're around them. They've got really nasty spines that are barbed. So if you do encounter them, you have to be careful not to get stuck by them. Another reason is the Native Americans used them substantially for food. They were an important source of calcium in the flower buds that grow right around this time of year. We'll have a look at some of those flower buds and how edible they are a little bit later. So let's start out by learning to recognize cholla cactus. They're on the genus Cylindropuntia, and as the term cylinder indicates, they're kind of tubular in nature. They're not like a barrel cactus or a saguaro cactus where they're bigger. They form these cylinders that rise up from a common base. So they're pretty easy to recognize. They have kind of a tree-like structure for the most part. So what I'm holding in my hand here is a section of cholla skeleton. This skeleton is kind of a unibody design, if you will. It's not like a saguaro where there's separate canes that come up that support the cactus. It's one big connected piece. And it has these diamond-shaped holes in it that allow nutrients to pass in and out between the skin and the vasculature, which brings the nutrients up and down through the cactus. So this stuff is very stiff, very rigid, and is often used by crafters. You can make some interesting stuff out of this cholla skeleton. You cut it up into short sections and you can cover large Christmas tree lights with them. And they give a very interesting pattern to the light. So interesting little craft projects that you can make out of these cholla skeletons. So we're going to start with the chainfruit cholla. You can see why it's called that from these fruit clusters here, which occur in long chains. So these are very easy to recognize from these chains. And these guys are called jumping cholla because if you stand on one of these joints, and I got to be very careful when I pick these up. I'm picking them up with my glasses. This is a joint of a jumping cholla, and if it doesn't actually jump out at you, however, all you have to do is touch one of these guys with clothing or skin, and it'll attach right to you, no problem at all. Also, if you step on them, I don't know if I can pull it off right here, but if you step on them, they will spring up. They're very springy, and they have these long spines that will propel the joint up and get you right in the back of the calf if you're not, that's where it normally gets me when I'm hiking out at Ironwood National Monument. It's particularly an issue if you're going off trail or bushwhacking, because the trails, they normally are kept clear of these cholla sections, or joints as they're called. But if you're bushwhacking going off trail, you'll quite often see these. So just as a side note, right next to me here is a beautiful, magnificent example of a crustated fishhook barrel cactus. So pretty impressive specimen here out in the Big Wash in Oro Valley, Arizona.
The chainfruit cholla is a late bloomer. It doesn't produce the pink blossoms until late in May, and in fact this picture was taken the second week of June. So remember, to identify the jumping or chainfruit cholla, look for the fruit clusters hanging down from very tall tree-like structures.
So this is the aptly named silver cholla, and this is a beautiful species of cactus to photograph early in the morning or right around dusk, because it really glistens in that magic hour sunlight. So if you encounter any of this, go back early in the morning or right around sunset and try to get some pictures or video of it, because it's so pretty in the morning light. This looks very similar to the chainfruit or jumping cholla, and the spines are just as nasty, if not nastier. This particular one, you'll notice, does not have any of the distinctive chainfruit hanging down from it. So that's the way you can tell the difference between chainfruit cholla or jumping cholla and the silver cholla. The silver cholla does not have the fruit attached to it. But otherwise, they actually look very, very similar.
So in summary, the silver cholla is kind of squatty, about 3 feet or so tall, with white 1.5-inch long spines, flowers that are greenish yellow, sometimes red, and 3/4-inch very spiny fruit pods that you don't want any part of.
So a logical question to ask is why would cholla cactus have evolved to have these little segments or joints that come off of the cactus so easily and then latch onto bypassing animals? And there's a reason for that. These cacti reproduce sexually. They have flowers. The flower buds were an important food source to the Native Americans. That get pollinated, and then these fruits actually have seeds in them that drop off to the ground and propagate in the area immediately around the cholla. But they can also propagate asexually, or they can clone themselves. So these little joints, if you stick them in the ground, they will immediately start to grow roots, and voila, you have a whole new plant that'll grow from one of these little balls. So the strategy here is bypassing animals would get these stuck to their fur. They would carry them miles away. They would eventually fall off, or the animal would die or whatever, and that little piece of the plant would eventually find its way into the soil and root itself farther away than perhaps pollen might be carried.
If you see a big pile of cholla chunks at the base of a tree or cactus, it's most likely a pack rat nest. These smart little rats pile up the prickly pieces to keep out coyote, rattlesnakes, and other predators. It's a very effective strategy.
The next species we're going to have a look at is the Christmas cactus, the Christmas cholla. And that's this guy right here. And this one is real easy to pick out. It has the smallest diameter canes of any of the cholla cactus, about 1/4 inch in diameter. And it gets its name from these bright little red fruits that come out right around Christmas time, pretty much last all winter long. And they're actually quite edible. They just have a few small glockids on them. Glockids are the small, fine, hairy thorns that they're not very intimidating, but you have to be really careful of them. You don't want to get any in your mouth or tongue, because that would be a very painful experience. So you do have to clean the glockids off. but they're very edible. Although, according to some stories, they can have some psychedelic properties to them, so be a little careful, don't overindulge. The Christmas cactus was made famous by Les Stroud of Survivor Man fame. In a second episode in the desert here, he actually consumed some of these. So there you go, the Christmas cactus, the Leptocolis, the last part of March here in Tucson, in Oro Valley. And you can see these fruits have probably been on here for about 3 months or so. And so they hang on the plant for quite a while. So there's a pretty good chance if you come here in the springtime that you'll be able to see and maybe even taste these fruits.
One quick note about finding the Christmas cholla is they quite often grow right at the base of a bush or a shrub or a tree like this mesquite, because they use the shrub as physical support. Because they're so thin, they don't stand up by themselves very well. So if you're looking to find them, look at the base of mesquite trees. In May, the Christmas cactus will start to develop buds, which, as far as I know, aren't edible. Shortly after, the blooms will appear. They're really small. They're only about 3/4 of an inch across and not particularly impressive. But if you get up close to them with a macro lens, they're actually kind of pretty. But if you do so, do be wary that there's some really nasty thorns on these bushes that can give you a good stab if you're not careful. So remember, the way to recognize Christmas cactus is the short, bushy nature of the cactus with the 1/4 inch stems and the brilliant red fruit.
So one of the most common varieties of cholla in the Sonoran Desert are the staghorn and the buckhorn cholla. And these both get their names from the fact that their branches look like deer antlers. So they're both named after deer, stag, buck. So the way you can tell these two apart is the staghorn has spine clusters that are short and staggered far apart from each other, whereas the buckhorn, which is this guy right here, has much longer spines, and the spines actually tend to overlap each other, or they bump up against each other. So that's how I remember the difference between these two. Staggered, staghorn. Bumping up against each other, buckhorn. And the buckhorn are the ones that have the highly nutritious flower buds that the Tohono O'odham gathered for food. So these are very important species of cactus and very prevalent in the Sonoran Desert. So I took a little stroll in the desert today, and it looks like some of the cholla buds are ready to harvest. This is a buckhorn cholla, which is traditionally one of the varieties of cholla that the Tohono O'odham would harvest. And you can see that the buds are actually pretty good sized on the cactus, and they come off fairly easy. I'm using a pliers. Of course, that would not be the traditional tool. The traditional tool would be or kind of like a child's chopstick, you know, 2 sticks kind of tied together. These come off fairly readily, not too much resistance when you give them a tug. You don't need to cut them off. The ones that you really want to harvest have a fairly distinctive shape to them. They're fairly substantial. There's a couple here. These are almost getting too big. They do have thorns on them, so you don't want to just use your fingers. You want to pluck them off with something where you're not going to injure yourself. And I think I've just about got enough here. I've got about a dozen. The Tohono O'odham would have put these into a wicker basket and then stirred them around with a stick. I'm just going to kind of bobble them around in here and whack them around with my pliers. The whole idea is to get the thorns to come off. The thorns will kind of fall off, and in a wicker basket they probably would have gone right through in between the slats. On this guy, they're not coming off quite as readily, so I'm not going to just pop one of these into my mouth, But when you get all done, you might need to clean off a few remaining thorns with your fingers very carefully, because if you're not careful, you're going to end up with thorns in your mouth, which you really don't want. And the good news is these guys don't have the real fine hairs on them. The Native Americans would have dried these over a mesquite fire, and then once they were dry, they would be good for a number of months. They would steam them or boil them to rehydrate them, but you can actually eat these raw. Yeah, kind of like a cross between asparagus and an artichoke, but pretty darn good. Cholla buds.
So after the fruit has a chance to mature, the question becomes, is it edible? And the answer is sort of. There's some really nasty spines on it. I've seen marmalade made out of the fruit, but to be honest, it's just not worth the hassle. About 3 weeks after I filmed the segment on harvesting cholla buds, the buckhorn flowers started to pop. They are typically red in color, and they have yellow stamens on the inside. As you can see, the bees love them. The staghorn flowers can look virtually identical to the buckhorn flowers, as seen on the left. They're almost the same color red. Or they can be kind of a lime yellow green, as seen on the right, which is distinctly different. So the way to identify the buckhorn and staghorn cholla are the deer antler branching patterns and the red to red-orange flowers in the spring.
Morning. We're along the Pontotoc Ridge Trail up in the Catalina foothills north of Tucson, Arizona. And I came out here this morning because what you'll see behind me here are some tremendous examples of teddy bear cholla. They look very similar to the silver cholla, but they just look fuzzier and they're quite a bit taller. You can see they have this kind of, almost looks like a dead area along their trunks. And then most of the growth is from the top. These are a favorite of the cactus wrens, the largest wren in North America. They love to build their nests in here. In fact, I can see a couple nests back in here, and you might be able to hear the wren cackling behind me. Some nice examples of cactus wren nests in a teddy bear cholla. So beautiful cholla. Watch out for it. It has a big tendency to drop joints. Can jump up just like the jumping cholla do. They can jump up and really get you pretty good because they are certainly covered with thorns.
The teddy bear cholla cactus have brilliant lime green flowers with green stamens on them, which distinguishes them from the buckhorn flowers, which can also be a similar lemon lime color. The buds are absolutely huge, but my guess is they're not edible just due to the massive number of spines on them. So the way to identify the teddy bear cholla is it's a little bit shorter than the jumping cholla on a single dark trunk, but has very dense 3/4 inch pale fuzzy looking spines and lemon lime flowers.
So the way you get these jumping cholla off of you, and I now have the honor of having not just one but two of them on me, is you use a lightweight pocket comb. So these are not a bad thing to bring along with you when you go hiking in the desert, and you can just flick these guys right off of your shoes, or hopefully not off your skin, because if they get attached to your skin, they are really nasty. The good news is they normally don't leave behind too much in the way of spines, but here I just caught a couple of them stuck onto the bottom of my shoe. So this is how you get rid of cholla spines. So if you hang out here in the Sonoran Desert long enough, one of the things you'll see is that some of the cholla species, in particular this cane cholla, will turn purple. And that's typically a combination of climate and soil conditions. So quite commonly here, these cane cholla will turn kind of this purple color when there's a drought. So as they don't have enough water, they will turn purple. I've also seen some varieties of prickly pear turn purple in the Grand Canyon, where there's particularly volcanic soil that seems to lend their color to it. But you can see this cane cholla here, the lemony fruits on it really stand out next to that purple cactus structure. So cane cholla along the Big Wash near Tucson, Arizona.
The cane cholla flowers are a beautiful magenta, almost looking like one of the hedgehog flowers. So to sum up, the cane cholla is best ID'd by being a little bit smaller with sparse drooping branches, magenta flowers, and the lemon yellow fruit that stays on almost year-round. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something about Cholla cactus from this video, and if you enjoyed it, please click like or subscribe to my channel below, or leave me a comment.